Jason Graham leaned against the counter of his dimly lit kitchen, staring at the half-empty bottle of wine that sat untouched beside him. The evening had dissolved into chaos, the same chaos that had consumed many of their nights over the past few months. Kelly's words still echoed in his mind, sharp as shattered glass, "I will sleep with other men. And I'm warning you, whether you like it or not." For 8 years, Jason had considered their marriage the bedrock of his life. He and Kelly had been a team, complementary opposites. Where he was pragmatic and deliberate, she was spontaneous and brimming with energy. Their first meeting at a friend's barbecue had felt like the beginning of a romantic comedy. Jason, nursing a beer on the sidelines, watched Kelly organize an impromptu volleyball game with strangers, her laughter infectious. By the end of the day, she'd pulled him onto the court, insisting he play despite his protests that he had 2 left feet. They'd ended up on the same side, laughing through the game, and by the time the sun set, Jason knew he didn't want to let her out of his life. But life was rarely like the movies. Over the years, the pressures of adulthood, work stress, financial worries, and the silent erosion of time, began to wear on them. Kelly had opened her yoga studio 3 years ago, pouring her heart into its success, while Jason's job in marketing kept him tethered to his desk. They stopped having lazy Sunday mornings and date nights. Conversations became transactional, grocery lists, bills, scheduling conflicts. Jason could pinpoint when things began to shift. Kelly started spending more hours at the studio, claiming the business needed her undivided attention. When he offered to help with bookkeeping or marketing, she waved him off. "You don't get it, Jay," she'd said once, her tone sharper than she probably intended. "It's not just a job for me, it's who I am." That was 6 months ago. Since then, there had been more late nights, phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, and a cold distance in her eyes that he couldn't reconcile with the woman he'd married. Jason tried to confront her a few times, asking if everything was okay, but she deflected each time. "I'm just tired, Jason. Running a business is exhausting. Why can't you just trust me?" He wanted to trust her. He wanted to believe that the foundation of their marriage was still intact. But then came the moment he couldn't ignore, a photo on her phone, accidentally left open on the kitchen counter. It was a selfie of Kelly and a man Jason didn't recognize. He was younger, lean, and wore the kind of smirk that made Jason's stomach churn. Kelly's hand was on the man's shoulder, her smile radiant, and the caption underneath read, "Best yoga partner ever." Red heart. Jason didn't mention the photo that night. Or the next. But it lingered in his mind, fueling a slow-burning suspicion that began to infect every interaction with Kelly. The fight that led to her shocking ultimatum started over something small. Jason had asked why she was late coming home from the studio again. Kelly, visibly irritated, snapped back that she didn't need to check in with him every time her schedule changed. The conversation escalated from there, the tension that had been simmering for months finally boiling over. "You don't even care anymore," Jason said, his voice rising. "You come home whenever you feel like it, you're glued to your phone, and you barely even look at me. What's going on, Kelly? Are you seeing someone else?" Her expression shifted, anger mixed with something colder, something calculating. "And what if I am?" she shot back. "What difference would it make? You don't own me, Jason." Jason's jaw clenched. "This isn't about control. It's about respect. If you're cheating, just say it." Kelly took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "You want honesty, Jason? Fine. Here it is, I will sleep with other men. And I'm warning you, whether you like it or not, that's how it's going to be." The room fell silent. Jason stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Kelly, seemingly satisfied with his stunned reaction, turned and stormed upstairs, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen. In the days that followed, Jason struggled to make sense of what had happened. Kelly carried on as if her declaration had never been made. She was cheerful in the mornings, kissed him on the cheek before leaving for work, and even suggested they go out for dinner one evening, as if nothing was amiss. Jason felt like he was losing his grip on reality. He confided in his best friend, Marcus, during a rare lunch outing. "I don't know what to do," Jason admitted, pushing his sandwich around on his plate. She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, like our marriage is some kind of open contract. Marcus frowned. "That's insane, man. What did you say back? I didn't know what to say. I just stood there like an idiot. Look, Marcus said, leaning forward, if she's not willing to work on things, you've got two options. You either walk away, or, he hesitated, lowering his voice. Or you level the playing field. Jason frowned. What are you talking about? Marcus smirked. Let's just say, sometimes people need a taste of their own medicine. The idea took root in Jason's mind, growing stronger with each passing day. If Kelly truly meant what she'd said, if she was ready to throw away their marriage, then perhaps it was time to remind her that two could play this game. He wasn't proud of the thoughts running through his head, but he couldn't ignore them. One evening, after Kelly left for another late-night meeting, Jason made a call to an old acquaintance, someone who owed him a favor. A week later, the stage was set. The day Kelly came home to find a stunning, model-like woman lying in their bed, Jason was sitting calmly in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. He heard the front door open, Kelly's footsteps pausing in the entryway before she climbed the stairs. Then came the sound he'd been waiting for, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a stunned, "What the hell is this?" Jason leaned back in his chair, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Kelly froze at the top of the stairs, her breath caught in her throat. From the doorway of their bedroom, she could see the woman sprawled languidly across the bed, her long, sculpted legs crossed casually as if she owned the place. She had the kind of effortless beauty that made Kelly's stomach churn, a mane of perfectly styled auburn hair, piercing green eyes, and a figure that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. The woman glanced up, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "Hey," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You must be Kelly." Kelly's heart pounded in her chest. Who are you? What the hell is going on?" From downstairs, Jason's calm voice carried up the staircase. "Come on down when you're ready to talk, Kel. No rush." The weight of his tone, cool, measured, almost amused, sent a chill down Kelly's spine. She tore her gaze away from the woman and stormed down the stairs, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. Jason sat in the armchair near the fireplace, his posture relaxed, one arm draped casually over the side. A glass of whiskey rested in his hand, the amber liquid catching the light. "Who is she, Jason?" Kelly demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and panic. "What is she doing in our bed?" Jason took a slow sip of his drink, his expression unreadable. "Her name's Elise," he said, as if he were introducing an old friend. "She's a model. We met a few weeks ago." Kelly blinked, her mind struggling to keep up. You brought her here? To our house?" Jason's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Why not? You made it clear how things were going to be, remember? Whether I like it or not, wasn't it?" For a moment, Kelly couldn't breathe. She remembered those words vividly, hurled in the heat of anger, meant to wound him, to push him away, to force a reaction. But she never expected this, a carefully calculated retaliation that turned her ultimatum on its head. "Don't twist this around," Kelly snapped, trying to regain her footing. "This is our marriage we're talking about, Jason. You don't get to just..." "Just what?" Jason interrupted, setting his glass down with a deliberate clink. "Act like you have. Rewrite the rules. Or is this different because it's me?" Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was a blur of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, humiliation. She hadn't anticipated him fighting back like this, and she didn't know how to counter it. "I didn't think you'd stoop this low," she said finally, her voice laced with venom. Jason let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, that's rich coming from you, Kelly. Do you even hear yourself?" He stood, his height and presence suddenly overwhelming. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she'd fallen in love with, steadfast, confident, but it was quickly replaced by someone colder, someone she barely recognized. He stepped closer, his tone sharp. "You said you'd sleep with other men, whether I liked it or not. You didn't leave room for a discussion, didn't care how I felt about it. So, tell me, Kelly, what exactly makes this different?" Her lips parted, but no defense came. Jason's piercing gaze held her in place, and for the first time in months, the power dynamic between them had shifted. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? Freedom. No accountability. No consequences. Well, congratulations, you've got it." "Stop," Kelly snapped, her composure cracking. "This isn't a game, Jason. Isn't it?" Jason leaned in, his voice low. "Because it feels like one to me. And guess what, Kel? I'm playing to win." The weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud, and Kelly found herself retreating a step. Jason returned to his chair, picking up his glass as if the conversation had drained all his energy. "Go ahead," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Run back upstairs. Have a chat with Elise. Or don't. It doesn't matter to me. I just wanted you to know what it feels like, Kelly. To have someone else invade your life, your space, your marriage. To see them lying there, as if they belong." Kelly didn't move. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan above them. Her mind raced with questions, doubts, and the sinking realization that Jason wasn't bluffing. He'd orchestrated this, every detail calculated to dismantle the flimsy narrative she'd built around her own actions. Finally, she turned on her heel and marched out the front door, slamming it behind her. Jason didn't follow. Upstairs, Elise leaned against the headboard, scrolling idly through her phone. She glanced up as Jason entered the room, a smirk playing on her lips. "Well?" she asked, her tone playful. "How'd it go?" Jason sat on the edge of the bed, his expression unreadable. "She'll come around," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Elise tilted her head, studying him. "You know, most guys would have just left. Packed their bags and walked away." Jason looked at her, his gaze heavy with something she couldn't quite place. "Maybe," he said. "But most guys don't spend 8 years building a life just to watch it burn." Elise didn't respond. For all her confidence and beauty, she wasn't part of this fight, just a pawn in Jason's larger game. And deep down, she knew that. Outside, Kelly sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. The memory of Elise's smug smile and Jason's unyielding calm played over and over in her mind. She'd wanted to push him, to see if he'd fight for her, but she hadn't expected this. For the first time in years, Kelly felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel, fear. Not of Jason, but of the damage they were capable of doing to each other. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A name flashed on the screen, a man Jason had never met, but one who'd quickly become a secret part of her world. She stared at it, her finger hovering over the screen. But for the first time, she hesitated. Kelly sat motionless in her car, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced as she replayed Jason's words, the smug expression on the mysterious woman's face, and the calculated way he had turned her own ultimatum against her. She'd meant her warning to be a shield, a defense mechanism to justify her growing distance and keep Jason at bay. But instead, he had flipped the script, weaponizing her threat in a way she hadn't seen coming. The name on her phone's screen blinked insistently. Darren. She knew if she answered, he would pick up on her shaken tone. Darren wasn't the type to let things go unnoticed, he thrived on control, precision, and the thrill of their secrecy. But tonight, Kelly didn't want to hear his smooth reassurances or clever suggestions. She needed to think. With trembling fingers, she declined the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, where it landed with a dull thud. For the first time in months, Kelly wasn't sure what her next move should be. Upstairs, Jason sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. Elise, still lounging comfortably among the rumpled sheets, watched him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. She twirled a strand of her auburn hair between her fingers, her emerald green eyes studying him as though he were a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Looks like she didn't take it well," Elise said, her voice light but probing. "Was that the reaction you were hoping for?" Jason didn't look up. "It wasn't about hoping for anything," he replied, his tone clipped. "It was about making a point." Elise chuckled softly. "Well, point made. But you didn't answer my question." Jason turned to face her, his jaw tightening. He didn't owe Elise an explanation, she wasn't part of his life, not really. She was a tool, a carefully chosen piece in a game that had spiraled far beyond his initial plans. But her confidence, her boldness, reminded him of Kelly in the early days of their relationship. That unnerved him more than he cared to admit. "Let's just say," Jason said finally, standing up and pacing the room, "sometimes people need to see what they're willing to lose before they realize what they have." Elise raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "And you think she's going to realize that because you threw me into the mix?" Jason stopped mid-step and turned to her, his expression darkening. "She's been acting like this marriage is hers to rewrite. Like I don't matter. Tonight was about reminding her that I do." Elise smirked but didn't push further. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, smoothing her dress. "Well, I think my job here is done," she said, her tone teasing. "Unless you need me to stick around and really hammer the point home." Jason didn't answer, and Elise grabbed her purse with a shrug. She paused in the doorway, throwing him a parting glance. "For what it's worth, Jason, you're not the worst guy I've helped out with something like this. But you might be the most interesting." With that, she was gone, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood as she descended the stairs. Jason listened as the front door opened and closed, and the silence that followed pressed heavily against his ears. Across town, Kelly pulled into the parking lot of a dimly lit diner. She needed to escape, to clear her head, and the diner was a safe space, one Jason rarely visited. Sliding into a corner booth, she ordered a coffee and stared out the window at the neon sign buzzing faintly against the night sky. Her thoughts drifted to Darren. What would he think if he knew what had just happened? Would he laugh it off, offering some witty remark about Jason's audacity? Or would he see the cracks forming in her carefully curated facade? Darren thrived on her chaos, but this was different. Jason wasn't just reacting, he was fighting back, and it made Kelly feel as though she were losing control of her own story. "Refill?" the waitress asked, startling Kelly out of her thoughts. Kelly nodded absently, watching the coffee swirl in her cup as it filled. She reached for her phone, hesitating before dialing Darren's number. The line rang twice before his smooth voice answered. "Kelly," Darren said, his tone both pleased and expectant. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me." "I needed some time to think," she replied, her voice tight. He chuckled softly. "Trouble in paradise?" Kelly bristled but chose her words carefully. "Jason's been acting out." "Acting out how?" Darren's curiosity was tinged with amusement, as though the idea of Jason stepping out of his mild-mannered role was a joke. "He brought another woman home," Kelly admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Darren's laughter rang out, rich and full. "Seriously? That's bold. I didn't think he had it in him." "It's not funny, Darren," Kelly snapped, her frustration boiling over. "This isn't a game. Isn't it?" Darren countered, echoing Jason's earlier words. "Come on, Kelly. You wanted freedom, didn't you? To live without his rules. Looks like he's finally caught on." Kelly clenched her jaw, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter in her mouth. "This isn't what I wanted." "Then what did you want?" Darren's tone shifted, losing its humor. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've been playing both sides. And now, surprise, one of them decided to fight back." The words stung more than Kelly cared to admit. She ended the call without saying goodbye, tossing her phone onto the table. Darren's voice lingered in her mind, a reminder of the precarious tightrope she'd been walking for months. Back at the house, Jason poured himself another drink, the quiet emptiness of the living room a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He thought about Elisa's parting words, about the calculated way he'd planned tonight, and about the look on Kelly's face when she found Elise in their bed. For a moment, he felt a pang of guilt, but he buried it quickly. Kelly had crossed lines first, lines that couldn't be uncrossed. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He picked it up, expecting another message from Marcus, who had been cheering him on from the sidelines. Instead, the screen showed an unfamiliar number. Jason hesitated before answering. "Hello." A smooth, male voice greeted him on the other end. "Jason Graham. I think it's time we had a conversation." Jason's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm someone who knows your wife quite well." The line went dead, leaving Jason staring at the phone in his hand. For the first time, the careful control he'd maintained throughout the evening began to slip. Jason sat in stunned silence, the anonymous call replaying in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. The voice had been calm, deliberate, every word carefully chosen to cut through Jason's defenses. The insinuation was clear, this stranger knew something about Kelly, something Jason didn't. And if tonight had proven anything, it was that he no longer had the full picture of his own marriage. His fingers tightened around the phone as anger bubbled beneath the surface. Who was this man? And how did he know Kelly? The possibilities churned in Jason's mind, each one more damning than the last. His jaw clenched as he considered calling the number back, but something stopped him. This wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. Jason stood, the weight of the whiskey in his stomach grounding him as he paced the living room. The house felt emptier than ever, the echoes of his confrontation with Kelly still lingering in the air. He glanced at the clock, it was nearing midnight, and Kelly still hadn't returned. He debated texting her, but what would he say? Where are you? Who are you with? The questions felt futile, almost desperate, and Jason refused to let himself fall into that trap. Instead, he opened a browser on his phone and typed the number into a reverse lookup site. The search churned for a moment before returning a result, Darren Hale. The name struck Jason like a physical blow. He'd never met Darren, but he'd heard the name before, in passing comments and half-hearted explanations from Kelly about a new yoga instructor she'd brought on at the studio. Darren. A name that had lingered at the edges of Jason's suspicions but never fully surfaced, until now. Jason's grip tightened around the phone. If Darren was the man behind the call, then he wasn't just an employee. He was something more, someone who had crossed the same lines Kelly had been skirting for months. And now, Darren was brazen enough to reach out to Jason directly. Across town, Kelly sat in her car outside the diner, staring blankly at her phone. Darren's voice still echoed in her ears, his words slicing through her carefully maintained narrative. For the first time, she felt truly cornered. Jason's unexpected move with Elise had thrown her off balance, but Darren's reaction had cut deeper. He'd always been the one pushing her, encouraging her to break free from the constraints of her marriage. And yet, now that Jason had fought back, Darren's amusement had turned to something colder, something that made Kelly question everything. The truth was, Darren thrived on chaos, and Kelly had been a willing participant. Their affair had started innocently enough, a shared coffee break, lingering glances during staff meetings. But Darren's charm was magnetic, and Kelly had found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. He made her feel alive, seen, desired in a way Jason hadn't in years. But Darren's charm had a dark edge. He liked control, and his influence over Kelly had slowly become suffocating. Tonight, his laughter had felt less like support and more like mockery. Kelly stared at the contact screen, her thumb hovering over his name. She needed clarity, but Darren wasn't the one who could give it to her. With a sigh, she started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, the neon diner sign disappearing in her rear-view mirror. Jason's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Kelly stepped inside, her expression guarded as she closed the door behind her. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the evening pressing down on them both. "Where have you been?" Jason asked, his voice low but steady. Kelly hesitated, shrugging off her coat. "Out. I needed some air." Jason nodded, his jaw tightening. "Did you get a call while you were out?" Kelly's eyes flickered with something, fear. Guilt, before she masked it with indifference. "A call?" "No." "Why?" Jason stepped closer, his voice hardening. "Because I got one. From Darren Hale." "Ring any bells?" Kelly's stomach dropped. She scrambled to find an excuse, something that wouldn't unravel under Jason's growing scrutiny. "Darren," she said, feigning confusion. "He's just someone who works at the studio." "Why would he call you?" "Don't," Jason snapped, his voice sharp. "Don't insult me by pretending I don't know what's going on." Kelly flinched, the mask slipping for a brief moment. Jason stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "How long, Kelly? How long have you been lying to me?" Her breath hitched, and for the first time, Kelly felt truly cornered. The walls she'd built around her secrets were crumbling, and Jason's anger was like a storm threatening to sweep away everything in its path. I don't, she began, but Jason cut her off. How long? He demanded, his voice rising. And don't you dare tell me it was just once or it didn't mean anything. Not after tonight. Kelly's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. I don't know, she said quietly. A year, maybe more. Jason's breath caught. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. He turned away, raking a hand through his hair as he tried to process the enormity of her betrayal. I wanted to feel something again, Kelly said, her voice trembling. I wanted to feel alive. Jason spun back to face her, his eyes blazing. And you couldn't talk to me? You couldn't tell me you were unhappy? Kelly shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. It's not that simple. No, Jason shot back. It's exactly that simple. You didn't want to fix this. You wanted out. Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Jason's fury was palpable, and for the first time, she realized just how deeply she'd underestimated him. This ends now, Jason said, his voice steady but cold. Him, us, everything. I'm not playing this game anymore. Kelly stared at him, her mind racing. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the balance of power tipping entirely in Jason's favor. And for the first time, she wasn't sure how to take it back. Jason stood by the fireplace, the glow of the embers casting sharp shadows across his face. Kelly sat on the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though trying to shield herself from the storm brewing in the room. The air was thick with tension, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on both of them. You say it wasn't simple, Jason said finally, his voice quiet but razor-sharp. But you made it simple, Kelly. You made it about him. About you. And you left me here, alone, wondering where I went wrong. Kelly opened her mouth to speak, but Jason cut her off with a sharp gesture. Don't, he warned. I don't want excuses. I want the truth. The whole truth. No more games. Kelly hesitated, her gaze darting to the door as though considering escape. But there was nowhere to run, no more lies left to shield her from the fallout. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet Jason's piercing stare. I didn't mean for it to happen, she began, her voice trembling. He was just a distraction at first. Someone who made me feel wanted again. I didn't think it would go this far, Jason. I swear. Jason laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that cut through her words. You didn't think it would go this far? A year, Kelly. A year of lies, of sneaking around, of treating me like I was the fool in my own marriage. Don't insult me by pretending this was an accident. Kelly's composure cracked. I was drowning, Jason, she cried. I felt invisible. Like I didn't matter to you anymore. And then Darren, she stopped, tears streaming down her face. He saw me. Jason's eyes flashed with fury. And you didn't think to tell me? To give me a chance to fix what was broken? No, you took the coward's way out. You burned it all down instead of fighting for it. The silence that followed was deafening. Jason turned away, his shoulders tense, and for a moment, Kelly thought she'd lost him completely. But then he spoke, his voice quieter now, laced with something she hadn't expected, pain. I saw the messages, Kelly, he said, his back still to her. The ones where you said you loved him. The ones where you talked about starting a new life together. Kelly froze, her heart sinking. You plan to leave me, Jason continued, turning to face her. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Didn't you? Kelly couldn't deny it, not when the truth was written all over his face. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought about it. But I didn't. I couldn't go through with it. Jason let out a shaky breath, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and resolve. And now, he asked. What do you want now, Kelly? Because I need to know. I need to hear you say it. Kelly wiped at her tears, her mind racing. She thought of Darren, of the thrill he'd brought into her life, but also of the control he wielded over her. And then she thought of Jason, of the life they'd built together, the love that had once burned so brightly between them. I want us, she said finally, her voice trembling. I want to fix this, Jason. I want to make it right. Jason stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. Why should I believe you? He asked, his voice raw. Why should I trust you after everything you've done? Because I'll prove it to you, Kelly said, her desperation clear. I'll cut Darren out of my life. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes, Jason. Just, please. Don't give up on us. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Jason turned back to the fireplace, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, Kelly thought he might walk out the door and never look back. But then he spoke, his voice steady but filled with an edge of finality. This is your last chance, Kelly, he said. If you want to fix this, it's going to take more than words. You have to show me. And if I see one more lie, one more betrayal. He turned to her, his gaze hard. We're done. For good. Kelly nodded, relief flooding through her despite the gravity of his words. I will, she promised. I'll prove it to you, Jason. I swear. The days that followed were tense and filled with uncertainty. Kelly deleted Darren's number, left the studio she'd worked so hard to build, and began attending couples therapy with Jason. It was grueling, painful work, but for the first time in years, they began to truly see each other again. But shadows lingered. Jason couldn't erase the image of Kelly's betrayal, and Kelly couldn't shake the memory of Darren's control. Trust was fragile, and both of them knew it would take time, if it ever fully returned. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Jason reached for Kelly's hand. She looked up, surprised, and saw a flicker of the man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd nearly lost. We've got a long road ahead, Jason said, his voice soft. But if you're willing to fight for us, then so am I. Kelly squeezed his hand, tears filling her eyes. I am, she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, they felt the faintest spark of hope. Epilogue. Months later, Kelly received an email from Darren, a simple, unassuming message that sent a chill down her spine. You think you're free, but you're not. You'll always belong to me. She stared at the screen, her heart racing, before deleting the email. She didn't tell Jason. For the first time, Kelly realized that rebuilding trust was not just about what she said or did, it was about the secrets she chose to keep. Would those secrets destroy them all over again? Only time would tell. What would you have done in Jason's place? Can trust ever truly be rebuilt after such betrayal? Share your thoughts below.